Hey guys, tonight we're clocking in for the strangest shift in history. The bizarre, baffling and frankly disgusting jobs that people actually did for a living in 1900s Britain. Not the respectable jobs your great-great-grandfather bragged about down the pub. I mean the real ones. The ones that involve sewers, corpses, dog mess, and waking up before dawn to fling dried peas at a stranger's window for money. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And a heartfelt thank you to the listener who suggested tonight's topic. Your ideas are the engine that keeps this whole sleepy little operation running, and I genuinely couldn't do it without you. If you'd rather drift off with us on Spotify, we're there now too, the link's tucked away in the description whenever you fancy it. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Somehow it's always 2 a.m. somewhere. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft background hum, get comfortable, and maybe enjoy the fact that an alarm clock wakes you up for free, because tonight you'll meet the man whose entire career was being other people's alarm. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered how anyone managed to wake up on time before alarm clocks were common? Have you ever hated your job so much that you fantasized about quitting, only to realise your job could have been collecting dog droppings off the pavement for a leather tannery? Ever complained about your commute when you could be wading chest deep through a freezing sewer, hoping to find a dropped coin before the rats and the rising tide find you? Could you spend an entire day standing silently outside a stranger's funeral, looking devastated for a few coins, without once checking your phone? Would you last a single morning lighting 400 gas lamps by hand, or would you give up halfway and leave the whole street sitting in the dark? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1902. Your back already aches, your boots already leak, and somewhere out there a job with your name on it is waiting. It does not offer a pension. It does not include a lunch break, and it almost certainly involves something you would rather not touch. Good luck. Let's start with the job that starts everyone else's day. Before the gentle chirp of a bedside alarm, before the snooze button you slap with the fury of 1,000 mornings, there was a person whose entire living was waking up other people. You are the knocker-upper, and your tools of the trade are a long bamboo pole and a complete absence of sympathy. Armed with that pole, sometimes tipped with wire, sometimes used to puff dried peas at the upstairs glass, you stroll the dark streets at 3 or 4 in the morning, tapping on the windows of sleeping workers who pay you a few pennies a week to do precisely this. You are in effect a human snooze button that cannot be slapped, and there's a wonderful little riddle waiting at the heart of your profession. Who, exactly, wakes up the knocker-upper? The answer, depressingly, is no one. You wake yourself in the pitch black, in the cold, by sheer force of will and a body clock so finely tuned by misery that it no longer needs an alarm of its own. You pull on damp clothes, you step out into a street where the only other living things are cats and the occasional policeman, and you begin your round. You know it by heart. Number 4 wants rousing at 4:30. The dock worker at number 9 needs 3 good taps and a shouted name because he sleeps like a felled tree. The seamstress 2 doors down asked you very specifically not to use the peas, because last time you cracked her window and she has not forgotten. The work itself is a strange little art. Tap too softly and your client sleeps on, misses their shift, loses their pay and blames you. Tap too hard and you wake the whole terrace, including several people who are most definitely not paying you and would dearly love a word. The pole has to be long enough to reach the upper windows, light enough to swing for hours, and accurate enough to ping a single pane without bringing the glass down into the bedroom. It's like fishing if the fish were asleep, slightly resentful, and lived on the first floor. Your customers are the engine of the industrial city. The mill hands, the dockers, the bakers, the market traders, all of whom must be up before dawn and none of whom can afford to oversleep. A clock costs money, and many of them haven't got one, or can't read it, or simply don't trust it. So they trust you instead. You're cheaper than a clock, more reliable than a rooster, and entirely incapable of being thrown across the room. For a handful of coppers a week, you are their guarantee against disaster. It is, when you think about it, an enormous responsibility to hang on the end of a stick. The weather naturally does not care about your noble calling. You tap windows in driving rain, in fog so thick you walk into lampposts you've known for years, in frost that turns your breath to smoke and your fingers to wood. And looming somewhere ahead, polishing its little brass face in the dark, is the cheap mass-produced alarm clock, quietly preparing to make your entire profession extinct. But for now, you are essential. So you walk your round, you tap your taps, and you deliver the whole city safely into another grey working day. Then you trudge home as everyone else rises, climb into a bed still warm from no one, and try to sleep through the racket of the world you just switched on. It's dusk now, and as the rest of the city heads home, your shift is just flickering to life. You are the lamplighter, and the entire glow of the modern street rests on your aching shoulders. With a long brass pole topped by a little flame, you move from gas lamp to gas lamp, reaching up to coax each one alight, then walking the whole exhausting round again before dawn to snuff them all out. There are hundreds of them, and you know every single one personally, the way you might know a difficult relative. Rain doesn't stop you. Wind that blows your flame out the instant you light it doesn't stop you either. You're essentially a one-man power grid, except the grid is on fire, and you have to walk to every part of it on foot. The pole is the whole job. At its tip sits a small wick or a pilot flame, and beside it a little hook, because each lamp must first be turned on at the tap, then lit, then occasionally argued with. A good lamplighter can do the whole dance in seconds. Reach up, twist, touch the flame, watch the soft yellow bloom catch, and move on without breaking stride. A bad one stands beneath an obstinate lamp in the rain, jabbing upward like a man trying to knight a ceiling, while passers-by offer unhelpful advice. Your round is a race against the dark. The light must arrive as the sun leaves, and you cannot be in 2 streets at once, so you walk fast, always fast, a small hurrying figure threading through the gathering gloom, while the windows above you glow gold one by one in your wake. Children sometimes follow you for the sheer wonder of it, watching the street come alive at the end of your pole. To them you are a kind of magician. To your feet, you are a man who walks roughly the length of the country every week and gets paid very little for the privilege. The lamps themselves are temperamental beasts. Gas hisses, gas leaks, gas occasionally decides to greet your flame with more enthusiasm than anyone intended. Mantles crack, glass fogs and blackens and needs cleaning. A lamp that won't light leaves a pocket of darkness on the street, and in that darkness, by long tradition, all sorts of trouble likes to gather. So you're not merely lighting lamps, you are pushing back the night itself one fragile flame at a time, for an entire city that will never once think about how its streets came to be lit. And then, in the small hours, you do the whole thing again in reverse. Out you go to snuff each one, plunging the streets gently back into darkness just before dawn, so that no precious gas is wasted on an empty morning. It is the loneliest walk imaginable, the city asleep, the lamps dying behind you, your own footsteps the only sound. Here is the cruel part, the part you can feel coming like a cold draught. Somewhere in the grand buildings, clever men are perfecting a new kind of light, one that needs no pole, no flame, no nightly walk, no you. The electric bulb is coming, quiet and clean and tireless, and it will switch on 100 streets at the flick of a single hidden lever. Your whole craft, Your whole intimate knowledge of every lamp in the parish is about to be made as useful as a candle in a thunderstorm. But tonight the gas still hisses and the dark still presses in, so you raise your little flame and carry on, the keeper of a glow that is already, very gently, beginning to go out. Let's talk about the streets, which in 1902 are less roads and more rivers of mud, manure and things best left unnamed. With thousands of horses clopping about the city, the ground is a churned-up paste of filth, and that is exactly where you come in. You're a crossing sweeper, and your job is gloriously simple. You stand at a busy junction with a broom and sweep a cleanish path through the muck so that well-dressed ladies and gentlemen can cross without ruining their fine shoes. In return, you hope they'll toss you a coin. You don't have a wage. You have a broom and a hopeful expression. It's a bit like being a street performer, except your entire act is moving manure out of the way and looking pitifully grateful. To understand your job, you must first understand the horse. The city runs on horses, thousands upon thousands of them, hauling cabs and carts and omnibuses through every street, and each one producing with cheerful generosity an astonishing daily contribution to the road surface. Add rain, add the grinding of 1,000 wheels, and the result is a thick, sucking, evil-smelling paste that covers the cobbles and waits patiently for the hem of a long skirt or the toe of a polished boot. The well-to-do simply cannot cross without disaster, and so a market appears, and into it steps you, sweeping. Your patch is everything. A good crossing, a busy corner where the rich must pass is worth fighting for, and fights do happen, because a prime spot can mean the difference between eating and not. You guard it like a shopkeeper guards a till. You learn the regulars, the kindly old gentleman who always has a penny, the gruff one who has never given you anything but expects the path clear regardless, the lady who tips well if you remember to wish her good morning. You are part road cleaner, part doorman, part beggar, and entirely at the mercy of strangers' moods. The broom is your livelihood, your weapon, and your stage prop all at once. You sweep ahead of the crossing customer in a kind of bowing, scuttling dance, clearing a strip of relatively solid ground a half step in front of their feet, then turning to receive whatever they care to give. Sometimes that's a coin, sometimes it's a nod, sometimes it's nothing at all, just a brisk walk straight across the path you broke for them, leaving you standing there with your broom and your dignity, both equally worn down. Many of you are children, and many are old, and a good number are missing a limb or otherwise unable to do heavier work, because crossing sweeping is one of the few trades that asks for nothing but a broom and the willingness to stand in filth all day. It sits right on the blurry line between an honest job and outright begging, which means the police take an interest, and a sweeper can be moved along, or worse, simply for being in the way of respectable life. The weather, as ever, is a two-faced friend. A dry spell means less mud, which means less need for you, which means lean days and an empty stomach. A downpour means misery and soaked clothes, but it also means the streets turn to soup, and suddenly everyone needs a clear path, and the coins come a little quicker. So you learn to love the rain that you hate, standing there in your dripping rags, broom in hand, sweeping a tidy little road to nowhere through the endless churning muck, and quietly thanking the very horses that ruin everything for keeping you in business. Now meet the loudest person in the city, and in 1902 the competition for that title is genuinely fierce. You're a costermonger, a seller of fruit, vegetables, fish, or whatever you can pile onto a wooden barrow and shove through the crowds. Your office is the gutter. Your entire marketing department is your own pair of lungs, and you bellow your prices in a sing-song roar that could peel paint off a wall. You have a secret slang to baffle outsiders, fierce pride in your patch of pavement, and a long-running feud with a costermonger 2 streets over. You are, essentially, an Edwardian small business owner, a logistics manager, and a town crier all rolled into one slightly sweaty man with a barrow and very strong opinions about the price of herring. Your day begins long before the customers appear in the cold and clamour of the wholesale market, where you must buy your stock for the day with money you may not actually have yet. This is gambling with vegetables. Buy too much, and it rots on the barrow before you can sell it. Buy too little and you run out by midday and go home with empty pockets. Buy the wrong thing entirely, a glut of plums when everyone wants onions, and you'll be eating your own profits, literally for a week. There is no shop, no shelf, no fridge to hide your mistakes in. Whatever you choose at dawn, you must shout into someone's shopping basket by dusk. Then comes the cry. Every costermonger has one, a personal anthem honed over years, a rolling, wailing, half-musical chant that announces your wares and your presence to an entire street at once. It is not really language so much as branding at the top of your voice. The exact words barely matter. What matters is the sound, the rhythm, the sheer carrying power that lets a busy housewife 3 floors up know, without looking, that the good cherries have arrived, and the good cherries are you. You are a walking advertisement with no off switch, and by the end of the day your throat feels like you've been gargling the cobbles. You also speak in code. Costermonger slang, a private back-to-front gabble, lets you talk freely in front of customers and rivals alike, warning a mate about a sharp-eyed policeman or a light-fingered child without tipping off the crowd. It's a secret language born of a tight, proud, prickly community that lives by its wits on the open street, looks after its own, and trusts almost nobody else. Within that world there is real status. The most successful among you become local royalty, decked out in suits sewn with rows of gleaming pearl buttons for the festivals and processions, dressed up like kings of the gutter, because if your throne is a barrow, you may as well wear the crown. The barrow itself is your whole empire on 4 wheels. It must be wheeled into position before the rush, defended against rivals creeping onto your patch, and shifted the instant a constable decides you're causing an obstruction, which, since you're standing in the road shouting at strangers, you technically always are. You haggle, you flatter, you remember everyone's name and everyone's usual order. You weigh with a thumb that has learned exactly how generous to look while remaining quietly profitable. And at the end of it all, hoarse, footsore, and smelling powerfully of fish, you wheel the empty barrow home through the dark, counting the day's takings coin by coin. It is a hard, loud, precarious living, scraped together 1 penny and 1 bellowed cherry at a time. But it's yours, every barrow load of it, and no costermonger worth his pearl buttons would ever dream of working quietly indoors for somebody else. It's mid-morning, and a peculiar smell is approaching. That smell is you, the cat's meat man, and your job is to walk the street selling little skewers of cheap horse meat to feed the city's pets. Yes, long before the tidy tins on a supermarket shelf, somebody had to trudge door to door with a basket of meat on small wooden sticks, and the local cats and dogs knew the sound of your approach far better than they knew their own names. You'd be mobbed by a furry parade of regulars, you'd hand the skewers to housemaids and landladies, and you'd somehow keep track of who owed you what. It's a bit like running a meal delivery service, except every single customer is a cat, none of them ever pay, and their owners only occasionally remember that you exist. The meat comes from the saddest end of the horse trade. When a working horse, of which the city has countless, grows too old, too lame, or too broken to pull a cart another mile, it ends its days at the knacker's yard, and what cannot be used for leather, glue, or fertilizer is boiled down and sold cheap as pet food. You buy it by the slab, cut it into portions, Thread it onto wooden skewers and load up your basket or barrow. It is not fit for people, or at least it is not supposed to be, though in the very hungriest households that line has been known to blur in ways nobody likes to talk about. Your round is a daily procession through the neighbourhood, and your true customers, the ones who genuinely care that you've arrived, walk on 4 legs. Cats appear on windowsills and area railings as if summoned by a bell. Dogs strain at gates. They know your footstep, your smell, the particular rattle of your barrow, and they greet you with an adoration that no human on your round will ever quite match. You are, to the animal population of the district, the single most important man alive, a daily miracle of meat made flesh, and they are not shy about telling you so at considerable volume. The humans are a trickier proposition. You sell to housemaids at the kitchen door, to landladies feeding the household cat that keeps the mice down, to the better off who keep pampered lapdogs, and to the poorer who keep a cat purely as working pest control. Many pay weekly or fortnightly, or whenever they happen to have it, which means you carry in your head a vast and ever-shifting ledger of small debts owed by people who will look you dead in the eye and swear they paid you on Tuesday. You learn to be patient, to be charming, and to keep very careful mental accounts, because chasing a halfpenny owed by a sharp-tongued landlady is a war you can never quite win. There is a strange tenderness to the job, for all its grim raw material. You are the reason a lonely widow's only companion stays plump and content. You are why the shopkeeper's mouser has the strength to keep the storeroom clear. In a city where a great many people can barely feed themselves, you are quietly feeding the creatures that keep them company and keep the rats at bay, and that is no small thing to carry through the streets in a basket. So you walk your round, trailing your loyal feline crowd, doling out skewers and excuses and good mornings, the patron saint of the city's pets. The smell follows you everywhere and never quite leaves your clothes. But somewhere a cat is purring on a warm lap because of you, which is, you decide, about as much gratitude as this job is ever going to offer. Let's add some music to this miserable morning, whether anyone asks for it or not. You are an organ grinder, and you wander the streets cranking a barrel organ that plays the same small handful of tinny tunes over and over until they're permanently lodged in the skull of everyone within earshot. Often, perched on your shoulder or the top of the organ, you have a small monkey in a tiny waistcoat, trained to hold out a cup for coins and to look adorably tragic. You are part musician, part beggar, and part walking nightmare for anyone trying to concentrate. People either adore you or hurl abuse from their windows, and sometimes manage both within the same song. The instrument itself is a wonder and a burden. A barrel organ is a heavy wooden box of pipes and pinned cylinders that plays a fixed set of tunes when you turn the handle. No skill required beyond the ability to crank steadily and not collapse. You did not write these tunes. You cannot change these tunes. You will play these exact same tunes, in this exact same order, every single day, possibly for years, until you hear them in your sleep, in your soup, in the silence between your own heartbeats. You're not so much a musician as a man chained to a music box the size of a wardrobe. Then there's the monkey, if you're lucky enough or unlucky enough to have one. The little creature is your business partner, your marketing strategy, and your single greatest asset, because a tune alone might earn you nothing, but a monkey in a tiny jacket doffing a tiny cap to collect coins is irresistible. Children shriek with delight. Soft-hearted ladies coo and reach for their purses. The monkey works the crowd with a professionalism that puts most humans to shame, and you split the takings with it in the only currency it accepts: warmth, scraps, and the dubious honour of being stared at all day by strangers. Your relationship with the public is, to put it gently, complicated. To some, you're a charming splash of colour in a grey city, a bit of cheap music and a smile for a coin. a welcome break in a hard day. To others, you are a public menace, a relentless racket grinding away beneath their window precisely when they are trying to think, sleep, work, or mourn. There is a particular and famous breed of irritable gentleman who regards the organ grinder as a personal enemy and will lean from an upstairs window to bellow threats, wave a stick, or in extreme cases offer you money simply to go and be musical somewhere else entirely, which frankly is a paying gig like any other. A great many of you are immigrants, far from home, scraping a living the only way an outsider with no English and no connections can, by buying or hiring an organ, learning the round, and turning a handle for coppers. It is a hand-to-mouth existence, lugging a crushingly heavy instrument over miles of cobbles, sleeping in cramped lodgings, sharing your supper with a monkey, and absorbing a daily quantity of abuse that would break a lesser spirit. The authorities are forever trying to move you along, to license you, to ban you outright, viewing your music as noise and your trade as little better than begging with a soundtrack, and yet on you grind, quite literally, filling the streets with the same cheerful, maddening, unstoppable tunes, day after day after day. You are the city's least requested and most persistent musician, the man who brings melody to people who would, on the whole, much prefer silence. The monkey tips its little hat. A coin clinks into the cup, and you turn the handle once more, because the next street has not yet had the pleasure. Now for something the children actually like. You're a hokey-pokey man, a street seller of cheap ice cream, and on a warm day you are the most popular person in the entire neighbourhood. The name comes from your garbled chant, rolling down the street as you push your little cart of frozen sweetness. For a halfpenny, children get a small lump of ice cream served in a glass called a penny lick, which they slurp clean and then hand straight back to you so you can serve the very next child with it. And yes, you read that correctly. The same glass. Wiped, perhaps, if you happen to be feeling generous. Hygiene, in 1902, is rather more of a suggestion than a rule, and your cheerful little glass licks are quietly spreading a great deal more than joy. Let's begin with the magic, because there is real magic here. Ice cream, cold and sweet and impossibly luxurious, available to a grubby-handed child for the price of a halfpenny, on a hot day, on their own street. To the children of the poorer districts, you're not a man with a cart. You are a walking holiday. They hear your cry. They come running. They press their faces to your cart and hand over coins clutched warm and sticky in their fists. And for a few blissful minutes, the hard edges of a hard life melt away into something cold and creamy and wonderful. Now let's discuss the penny lick, because it deserves its own dark moment. This is a small, thick glass with a shallow dip in the top, into which you spoon a modest portion of ice cream. The child licks it clean, right down to the glass, and then hands it back. You give it a wipe, if there's a cloth handy and the queue isn't too long, and then you fill it again for the next eager customer. The glass is thick at the base, partly to make the portion look bigger than it is, a small and forgivable trick of the trade. But the real legacy of the penny lick is invisible. Every shared glass is a tiny relay race for germs, passing whatever one child carries along to the next and the next and the next, all summer long. Your ice cream itself is made under conditions that would horrify a modern inspector, and probably did horrify the Edwardian ones. It is mixed and stored in cramped, hot back rooms, kept cold with ice and salt, handled by hands that have been doing many other things all day, and sold from a cart that has trundled through streets thick with horse traffic. The result tastes glorious and may, on a bad day, come with consequences. The connection between your delightful product and the occasional bout of neighbourhood illness is not yet fully understood, which is for now very convenient for business. Many of you, like the organ grinders, are immigrants, often from Italy. bringing the craft of ice cream from a sunnier land to the drizzly British street and building a living 1/2 penny at a time. You work brutally long hours in the warm months, racing the heat that both creates your customers and threatens to melt your stock into a sweet puddle of lost profit, and you brace for the cold months when nobody on earth wants ice cream and the cart sits idle. But on a hot afternoon, none of that matters. Your cry rolls down the street. The children come. The coins clink, and the little glasses go round and round and round. You're dishing out pure joy by the spoonful to people who get precious little of it, and if that joy occasionally comes with a side of stomachache, well, nobody ever said paradise was sterile. Before the morning paper, before the radio, before the phone in your pocket buzzing with news you never asked for, there was a man with a bell and a tremendous shouting voice. That man is you, the town crier, dressed in a coat far grander than your wages could ever justify. You stride into the square, ring your handbell, bellow, "Oyez, oyez," and then announce the news, the proclamations, the lost dogs, and the occasional public scolding to whoever happens to be standing about. You are a human newsfeed with absolutely no volume control. By 1902, your profession is fading fast, elbowed roughly aside by cheap printed newspapers, but in the smaller towns you cling on regardless, the loudest and proudest dinosaur on the high street. The job is older than almost anyone can remember, stretching back to the long centuries when most people could not read a word, when there was no newspaper to buy and no notice worth pinning up because no one could decipher it. In those days you were the news, the official voice of the authorities, the only way a proclamation from on high could reach the ears of ordinary folk. To strike or mock the crier was a serious offence, because to harm you was to harm the king's own message, and that little legal shield is the proudest feather in your magnificent overstated hat. Your equipment is gloriously simple. A handbell to cut through the chatter of the market and command attention. A voice, trained and bellowing, capable of filling a square and bouncing off the far walls. And the costume. Oh, the costume, the long coat, the breeches, the buckled shoes, the tricorn hat. An outfit so grand and so antique that you look less like a working man and more like a piece of the town's history that has detached itself and started walking about. You dress this way precisely because the spectacle is the point. People stop for a man in a splendid coat ringing a bell. They would not stop for a man in ordinary clothes muttering the news. The cry itself is a performance with rules. The bell rings. The great call goes up. Oyez, oyez, an old word meaning simply hear ye, a command to listen that has outlived the language it came from. Then the announcement delivered slowly, clearly, at a volume that brooks no argument, and finished with a time-honoured blessing for the monarch. You are reading the headlines to a crowd that cannot read them for themselves, and you must get every word exactly right, because a crier who garbles a proclamation is a crier who will soon be looking for other work. But here is the cold wind blowing through the square. The newspaper has arrived, cheap and plentiful and getting cheaper, and more people can read it for themselves. Why wait in the cold for a man with a bell to tell you yesterday's news when you can buy today's for a penny and read it by your own fire? Your great booming voice, once the only news in town, is becoming a quaint curiosity, a bit of pageantry rolled out for fairs and festivals rather than a genuine public service. And so you carry on, in the towns small enough and old enough to still want you, ringing your bell into a world that is learning to read itself. You are a relic, and you know it, but you are a magnificent relic, and on market day, when you plant your buckled shoes in the square and let that first great oyez roll across the crowd, the whole town turns to look, just as it always has. The news will outlive you. The bell, you suspect, will not. Here comes a cart pulled by a tired horse and driven by a man who can find value in absolutely anything. That man is you, the rag and bone man, and you make your living collecting other people's rubbish. Old rags, scraps of metal, bones, bottles, and bits of who knows what. You trade a few coppers or a small trinket for it, then sell the whole lot on to be turned into paper, glue, fertilizer, and a dozen other things people would much rather not think about. You are the original recycling service, the Edwardian circular economy, a one-man waste empire built on the simple truth that one household's bin is another man's livelihood. Your stock in trade is the stuff that everyone else has decided is worthless, which is exactly why it makes you a living, because almost nothing is truly worthless if you know who to sell it to. Old rags become paper in the mills, the soft pulp of cast-off shirts reborn as clean white sheets. Bones are boiled down for glue, ground for fertilizer, carved into buttons and handles. Scrap metal goes back to the furnace. Broken bottles return as new glass. Even bits of you would rather not ask find a buyer somewhere down the grimy chain of trade. You are the first link in a vast invisible system that quietly feeds the city's discarded matter back into the city itself. The cry is how the neighbourhood knows you've come. Down the terraced streets you go at a walking pace, your tired horse plodding along, while you send up a long, wavering call, those famous 3 words worn smooth by repetition until they're barely words at all, more a kind of mournful music. Doors open. Children are dispatched with armfuls of household cast-offs. Housewives appear with worn-out clothes, a cracked pot, a bundle of bones saved from the Sunday joint, and the haggling begins, conducted with the seriousness of a treaty negotiation over goods worth, at most, a few pennies. Payment is an art form in itself. Sometimes you give coins, carefully counted out and reluctantly parted with. But often you trade in trinkets and treats, because you've learned what makes people part with their rubbish most cheerfully. A goldfish in a jam jar for a bundle of rags, a balloon or a windmill on a stick for the children, who will then nag their mothers to save everything for your next visit. A donkey stone for whitening the doorstep, handed over with a flourish, as if you are doing the customer an enormous favour, rather than buying their junk for a fraction of its worth. You're a salesman in reverse, persuading people to pay you in goods for the privilege of being relieved of their own. The horse is your most important colleague, and the two of you understand each other completely. It knows the round, knows where to stop, knows the pace of a working day, and pulls the cart faithfully through every weather while you do the shouting and the dealing. Without it, you're just a man with too much to carry. With it, you are a business on wheels, able to haul a full day's gleanings to the dealer who will weigh your sorry treasures and pay you out, bone by bone and rag by rag. It is humble work, and the world looks down on it, wrinkling its nose at the smell and the mess and the very idea of making money from refuse. But you know a secret the respectable folk have never grasped. There is no such thing as waste, only value that hasn't found its next owner yet. So you plod on behind your patient horse, calling your worn old cry down the empty streets, gathering up the things the city threw away and quietly handing them back to it, transformed for a profit. Rubbish to one, riches to another, and you, the man in the middle, taking your small honest cut of the difference. Now we descend into the truly grim, so take a breath, though perhaps not too deep a one. You're a pure finder, and your job, your actual paid job, is to walk the streets collecting dog mess, not as a public service, as a raw material. The tanneries that turn animal hides into fine, soft leather need dog droppings, politely called pure, to clean and treat the skins, and somebody has to gather it all up. That somebody is you, bucket in hand, scanning the gutters with the focused eye of a treasure hunter, because to you this genuinely is treasure. You're paid by the bucketful, the cleaner and drier the better, and over the years you develop strong professional opinions about quality. let's address the obvious question first, because it is a good one. Why on earth would a tannery want this? The answer lies in the strange chemistry of turning a dead animal's skin into supple, sweet-smelling leather. Part of that ancient process involves steeping the hides in a foul preparation that softens and purifies them, and dog droppings rich in exactly the right substances do the job beautifully. The trade gave the muck its hopeful, almost holy nickname, pure, perhaps because it cleansed the leather, perhaps as a small joke at the expense of the people who had to collect it. Either way, the leather glove on a fine lady's hand began its journey in your bucket. Your working day is a slow, patient patrol of the streets, eyes down, bucket ready, reading the pavement the way a tracker reads a forest. The city is full of dogs, and dogs, like everyone else, must answer nature's call, so the raw material is everywhere if you know how to look. You learn the best streets, the ones where the well-fed dogs of the well-off produce the prized firm, pale, dry article that the tanneries pay the most for. You come to understand with a connoisseur's eye that not all pure is created equal, and you will defend the superiority of your collection to any rival who suggests otherwise. There is competition, naturally, because there always is. Other pure finders work the same streets, and a good patch is worth guarding. There are tricks of the trade too. The unscrupulous have been known to bulk out their buckets with mortar or other pale rubbish to fake quality and cheat the tannery, a deception that works exactly once before the buyer learns to inspect every load with a suspicious finger. Honesty, it turns out, is the best policy even at the very bottom of the economic ladder, because a reputation for clean, genuine, pure is the only thing standing between you and starvation. The work is, to put it mildly, not glamorous, and the world treats you accordingly. You are near the very bottom of the great heap of street trades, below the rag and bone man, below the crossing sweeper, in a place where polite people simply do not look. The smell is your constant companion, soaked into your hands and clothes, impossible to wash away. Children point, adults cross the road, and yet the work is steady, the demand reliable, and a determined pure finder can earn a living wage doing it, which is more than many a more respectable trade can promise. So you walk your patient round, bucket swinging, gathering the city's most unmentionable leavings, and selling them onward to be transformed, through a chain of stinking miracles, into the gleaming leather of boots and gloves and book bindings owned by people who would faint to learn how it all began. It is humble, it is humbling, and it is, when you stop to think about it, a small daily act of alchemy, turning the lowest thing in the gutter into something fine enough for a duchess. You just try very hard not to think about it, and you certainly never, ever describe it at the dinner table. The tide is going out on the Thames, and a small ragged army of the desperate is already wading into the stinking grey mud it leaves behind. You are a mudlark, very often a child or an old woman, and you scour the river bank for anything that can be sold. Lumps of coal, bits of rope, scraps of iron, the occasional lucky coin. The mud is freezing. It sucks hungrily at your bare feet, and it is, to put it delicately, not clean, because the river is where the entire city's waste eventually ends up. You'll work for hours for a few pennies worth of salvage, all while racing the returning tide that could quietly swallow you whole. It's like beach combing, if the beach were made of sewage and the holiday happened to be your whole life. Your working hours are dictated entirely by the moon, because the moon controls the tide, and the tide is your employer. Twice a day the river pulls back and lays its filthy banks bare, and that narrow window of low water is when you work. Miss it and there's nothing to scavenge but slime. So your whole life runs on a schedule no human invented, shuffling down to the foreshore at dawn or dusk or the dead of night, whenever the water happens to retreat, picking your way out across the glistening ooze in the cold half-light. The mud itself is your great enemy, and your only provider. It is soft and deep and treacherous, and it grips your bare feet, because boots would only get sucked off and lost, leaving them blue and numb and cut by the buried glass, nails and jagged metal that the river hides like spiteful little traps. Step wrong and you sink to the knee. Step worse and you find yourself stuck fast as the tide turns, and the tide does not wait for anyone, least of all a small cold person too far from the steps. Drownings happen. Everyone who works the foreshore knows someone the river kept. And what do you find for all this misery? Mostly very little, and all of it small. A few lumps of coal fallen from the barges, worth a precious penny or two to a family that can't otherwise afford to keep a fire. Lengths of old rope sold back to the boatmen to be picked apart and reused. Nails, bits of iron, scraps of copper, anything metal that can be weighed in at the dealers. A bone here, a rag there, and once in a blue moon, the prize that keeps every mudlark scanning the mud with hope long after their feet have gone numb. A coin, a buckle, a thing of real value, dropped centuries ago or yesterday, surrendered by the river for no reason at all. You're at the very bottom of everything, lower even than the street trades, because at least the crossing sweeper works on dry land in the open air. You work in the cold, sucking dark in the city's foulest leavings, for the smallest reward, and the respectable world regards you as little better than the mud you stand in. Disease is your constant lodger. A cut on the foreshore can fester for weeks. The smell never leaves you. But the river gives just enough to keep you coming back, one frozen morning at a time. A penny of coal here, a lucky farthing there, enough to put a little bread on the table and stay alive until the next low tide. So you wade back out into the ooze as the gulls wheel overhead, eyes down, fingers blue, racing the patient water that will sooner or later want its bank back. The Thames takes almost everyone in the end. You're simply hoping it pays you a little first. If the mudlark works on top of the filth, you go right inside it. You're a tosher, a sewer hunter, and you climb down into the dark, dripping tunnels beneath the city to scavenge for lost valuables, coins, jewellery, scraps of metal, anything that's been washed into the depths and forgotten. You work by candlelight in air that could knock you out cold. You navigate by memory and instinct alone, and you carry a long pole both to test the ground ahead and to fend off the rats, of which there are uncountably, enthusiastically many. Cave-ins, sudden floods, and pockets of poison gas are all just part of the working day. Let's start with the logic, because there is logic here, mad as it sounds. The whole city drains into the sewers, and along with the water and the waste go an astonishing number of small valuable things. Coins dropped through gratings, rings slipped off soapy fingers, jewellery lost down drains, scraps of metal washed in from 1,000 streets. Over years and decades, these treasures collect in the slime and the cracks, snagged on brickwork, settled in the bends. The sewers, to a tosher, are a slow river of accidental wealth, and you are the prospector panning that river in the dark. Your equipment is sparse and sacred. A lantern, of course, though a naked flame in a tunnel full of gas is its own quiet gamble. A long pole, hoe-like, to feel the unseen floor ahead, to fish treasures from the muck, and to deliver a sharp lesson to any rat that fancies a bite. Loose, hardy clothes with capacious pockets, and a canvas apron. And above all, knowledge. An intimate, hard-won map carried entirely in your head, of which tunnels connect where, which are sound and which are crumbling, where the air goes bad, and most vital of all, where the tide and the storm water can come surging in without warning. That last danger is the one that haunts every tosher. The tunnels flood, a heavy rain above ground, a turning tide at the river outfalls, and a passage that was ankle deep a moment ago can fill in minutes, trapping you in the dark with nowhere to climb. Toshers learn to read the water and the weather like sailors, and they work in 2s and 3s for exactly this reason, because alone in a flooding tunnel, a man simply vanishes and is never spoken of again. The gas is the other silent killer. Pockets of foul air that can fell you between one breath and the next, dropping you face first into the very thing you came to search. It is, by the standards of the desperate trade, surprisingly well paid, and that is the whole grim joke of it. A skilled tosher who knows the tunnels and survives long enough can earn a genuinely decent living, far better than the mudlark scraping the bank above, far better than the crossing sweeper in the rain. The money is good precisely because the job is appalling, because so few will do it, because the sewer keeps a share of those who try. You're paid in proportion to your willingness to spend your life knee-deep in the worst place on earth, holding a candle to the dark. So down you go, through the grating, into the warm reeking blackness, your lantern throwing mad shadows on the dripping brick, your pole sweeping the unseen floor, the rats watching from every ledge with their small bright eyes. You move slowly, listening always for the rush of water, feeling for the glint of a coin in the muck. It is filthy, deadly, solitary work in a place no human was meant to go. And yet, of all the bottom-of-the-barrel trades in the city, yours might just be the best paid, which tells you everything you need to know about how much anyone would pay to never, ever do it. It's the dead of night, and a cart is rumbling slowly down the lane, accompanied by a smell that announces its arrival several minutes in advance. That cart is yours, night soil man, and your job is to empty the cesspits and privies of the city under the cover of darkness, because nobody on earth wants this happening in daylight. With a shovel, a bucket, and a constitution forged from iron, you scoop out the waste, load it onto your cart, and haul it off to be sold to farmers as fertilizer. You work nights partly out of decency, and partly because the smell could clear an entire street at noon. It is, without a shred of exaggeration, one of the worst jobs ever invented. Here is the unglamorous truth of the Edwardian city. A great deal of it has no flushing toilet and no proper drains. Households share a privy in the yard, a simple seat over a deep pit, and that pit fills, slowly and inevitably, with the daily output of every man, woman and child who uses it. When it is full, it must be emptied, because the alternative is unthinkable and in time lethal. And so a trade exists, ancient and essential and entirely unspeakable, to come in the night and carry the dreadful business away. That trade is yours. You work in a gang, usually, because no one person should face a cesspit alone, and because the work is heavy and the hours short. By lantern light you lift the cover, and the smell rises to meet you like a living thing. A wall of stench so thick it has weight, so foul it makes your eyes stream and your stomach lurch no matter how many years you've done this. Then down you go with bucket and shovel and long-handled scoop, lifting the contents out load by load, passing them up to be poured into the great tub on the cart, working fast because the householders are asleep above you and the dawn is coming and no one wishes to meet you in the act. The cart itself is a thing of legend in the worst possible way, a sealed tub on wheels brimming with the night's collection, trundling through the silent streets toward the edge of the city. There your cargo is sold, because even this has value. The farmers want it for their fields, where it does honest work coaxing crops from the soil, so your dreadful harvest is not wasted. It goes back to the land, feeds the wheat, becomes the bread on the very tables it came from, in a circle of life that nobody at those tables would care to contemplate over breakfast. The dangers are real, and they are grim. The pits give off gas, the same silent, suffocating air that stalks the toshers in their tunnels, and night soil men have been overcome and died at the bottom of cesspits, dropping where they stood. The filth carries disease, and a cut or a splash can turn deadly. And the social cost is heavy too. You are shunned, your trade unmentionable, your clothes and your very skin marked by a smell that no amount of washing will lift. People know what you do, and they would rather not. And yet, consider this. Without you, the pits overflow, the disease spreads, the city poisons itself in its own waste. You are, for all the revulsion, one of the quiet guardians of public health, the man who carries away the thing that would otherwise carry away the city. So you finish your round as the sky greys, your cart full, your work done, and you trundle home to sleep through the day, while the streets you cleaned bustle on, blissfully unaware. It is the worst job in the world, and somebody has to do it every single night, while everyone else has the good sense to be asleep. Down at the docks, the whole country's warmth is being dragged out of ships by hand, one back-breaking basket at a time. You're a coal whipper, and your job is to unload coal from the bellies of the ships using a system of ropes, baskets, and your own rapidly disintegrating body. You stand on a platform and haul, or you swing down in the dark hold-filling baskets in a thick fog of black dust that settles on your lungs, your skin, and everything you will ever own. The work is brutal, the hours are merciless, and you're often paid inside a dockside pub, which means a worrying amount of your wages evaporates before you ever reach home. The whole city, the whole country, runs on coal. It heats the homes, fires the factories, drives the trains and the steamships, and most of it arrives by sea, packed into the holds of collier ships that must be emptied fast so they can sail again. Emptying them is a job no machine yet does well, and so it falls to gangs of men with ropes and muscle and a terrifying tolerance for punishment. That gang is you, and the curious name for your trade comes from the whipping motion of the work itself, the rhythmic heave that flings each loaded basket up out of the depths. A whipping gang works like a single grim machine. Down in the hold, men shovel the coal into great baskets in choking darkness. Then comes the whip. A team up on deck grabs the rope and in unison leaps from a platform, throwing their whole body weight downward so that the basket is snatched skyward, swung over and emptied, again and again and again, all day long, in a brutal bouncing rhythm that turns men into pistons. It demands perfect timing, total trust, and a back that can take the strain hour after hour. Get the rhythm wrong and a swinging basket of coal can break a man in half. The dust is everywhere, and it is relentless. It hangs in the air of the hold so thick you can taste it, coats your skin until your own mother wouldn't know you, works into every crease and pore and settles, worst of all, deep in your lungs, where it does its slow, patient, lifelong damage. You cough black. You spit black. You blow your nose and the cloth comes away black. Years of this and a man's chest is ruined, his breath a wheeze, his lungs as dark inside as the cargo he spent his life hauling. The coal keeps the nation warm. It quietly cools the men who move it. Then there is the matter of pay, which for generations was its own special cruelty. The whippers were hired not at the dock but at the public house, by middlemen who also happened to sell beer and who arranged matters so that a whipper could hardly get work without drinking and could hardly collect his wages without spending a good part of them on the spot. A man would break his body all day only to hand half his earnings back across the bar before he ever saw daylight at home. It took hard fighting and hard organising to drag the trade out of the grip of the drink sellers and into something approaching fairness. So you haul, and you swing, and you breathe the black air, gang of you moving as one in the gloom of the hold, emptying the ships that feed the fires of a nation that will never once picture your face. You are the unseen muscle behind every cozy hearth, every steaming kettle, every warm parlour in the land. They feel the heat. You carry the cost, basket by basket, breath by blackening breath, and then you trudge home through the dark, dusted head to foot in the very warmth you'll never quite afford to enjoy. Every city in 1902 has a rat problem, which means every city quietly needs you. You're a rat catcher, and you make your living hunting down the countless rodents infesting homes, shops, warehouses and sewers. Armed with traps, poisons, a keen little terrier or two, and sometimes simply your own bare hands, you wade into infestations that would make most people sell their house on the spot. The truly enterprising among you keep the finest rats alive to sell on for rat baiting contests, or breed the odd unusual coloured one as a pet, because waste not, want not. It's dangerous work, but it's strangely respectable, in the way any job becomes respectable when everyone desperately needs it done, and absolutely nobody wants to do it themselves. The rat is the great unspoken citizen of the city, present in numbers that would frighten you if you let yourself dwell on them. They're in the cellars and the granaries, the sewers and the stables, the docks and the slum courts, breeding with horrifying enthusiasm, eating the food, fouling the stores, and though nobody yet fully understands the connection, carrying disease through the population on their small, relentless feet. Where there are people and food and filth, there are rats, and so there is always, everywhere, work for you. Your methods are a mixed bag of cunning, chemistry, and good honest dog. Traps of every design baited and set in the runs where you've learned the rats travel. Poisons mixed to your own jealously guarded recipes, because every rat catcher fancies himself an alchemist with a secret formula. And best of all, the terrier, that small ferocious miracle of a dog bred and trained for exactly this, who can clear a barn of vermin faster than any trap and with a great deal more enthusiasm. A good ratting dog is worth more to you than gold, your partner and your pride, and you'll talk about its kill count the way other men boast of their children. Some of you take the showmanship even further. The most famous rat catchers became genuine celebrities, dressing in flamboyant outfits, building grand reputations, even claiming royal appointments, turning a filthy trade into something close to glamour. And there is money in the rats beyond simply killing them. The finest, fiercest specimens can be sold alive to the men who run rat-baiting pits, where dogs are set against rats for sport and gambling, a brutal entertainment that needs a steady supply of healthy vermin. The oddities too, the rats with strange pale coats or unusual markings, can be bred and sold as curiosities, the ancestors, in fact, of the tame pet rats that would come long after you. The dangers are constant and they bite, sometimes literally. A rat cornered is a rat that fights, and its teeth carry filth straight into the wound, and in an age before antibiotics a bad bite can fester, sicken and even kill. You handle poisons that don't much care whether it's a rat or a rat catcher that swallows them. You crawl into spaces thick with disease, chasing creatures that have learned over countless generations to be cleverer and faster than the men who hunt them. But you are needed, and that need gives your grim trade a dignity the mudlark and the pure finder never quite earn. When the rats overrun a warehouse or a fine house or a city block, it is you they send for, you and your traps and your fearless little dogs, and you go in and you win, mostly for now. So you sling your bag of traps over your shoulder, whistle up your terrier, and head off to do battle in someone's cellar, the city's tireless soldier in a war that can never truly be won, only fought again tomorrow in a different cellar against the same endless enemy. Now we turn to the world of medicine, which in 1902 still has one foot planted firmly in the swamp. You're a leech collector, and your job is to gather the slimy little bloodsuckers that doctors use to treat just about everything. Because the old idea of bleeding an illness out of a patient hasn't entirely died off yet. To collect them, you wade into ponds and marshes and deploy the finest equipment available to you, your own bare legs. The leeches attach, you let them feed until they're round and fat, and then you peel them off and drop them into a jar to sell. You go home each evening cold, soggy, faintly anemic, and dotted with little wounds, having voluntarily donated your own blood as bait all day long. To understand your strange profession, you have to understand how doctors still think. For centuries, medicine has held that many illnesses come from too much blood, or bad blood, and that the cure is to draw some of it off, restoring the mysterious balance of the body. The neat, controllable way to do this is with the medicinal leech, a small dark creature that fastens to the skin, fills itself with blood, and drops off, taking a measured little portion of the patient with it. Hospitals and physicians want them by the thousand, and somebody has to supply them, fresh from the wild. That somebody is you. The hunting ground is the marsh, the pond, the slow weedy edges of still water where the leeches lurk. And here is the part that makes everyone wince. The most reliable bait is a warm-blooded animal wading in, and the cheapest warm-blooded animal available is yourself. So in you go, skirts hitched or trousers rolled, bare legs sinking into the cold ooze, and you wait. The leeches sense you, swim to you, and fasten on, and you stand there in the freezing water and let them, because each one that attaches to your shin is a coin in your pocket. You're quite literally fishing with your own blood. When a leech has gorged itself fat and round, you pick it off and pop it in your collecting jar or pot, careful not to lose your stock, and then you let the next one have its turn. By the end of a day's wading, you've fed a small crowd of them, and the price you pay is your own. Cold to the bone, legs spotted with little bleeding wounds that don't want to close, and a faint persistent lightheadedness from giving away rather more of yourself than you'd like. It is, when you think about it, one of the few jobs where the worker is also partly the raw material. The dangers go beyond the obvious squeamishness. Standing for hours in cold marsh water wrecks the health, and the constant small blood loss leaves collectors pale and weak. The wounds can turn bad, and the work is seasonal and uncertain, dependent on weather and water and the unpredictable habits of a wild creature. Worse still for your prospects, the leeches themselves are growing scarce, hunted so hard for so long that the ponds are running short of them, which sounds like good news for your legs, but is rather bad news for your wages. But the truly comforting thing, the rare bright note in this clammy little trade, is that the whole profession is quietly dying. Medicine is, slowly and grudgingly, leaving the leech behind, learning that you cannot bleed a fever into submission, that the answer to illness is not always to remove some of the patient. As the doctors put down the jar of leeches for good, your strange cold work fades with it. So you wade out one more time into the freezing marsh, offering up your shins to the hungry dark, comforted only by the thought that the future, mercifully, will have no use for either you or your bloodsuckers, and that nobody after you will ever have to call their own legs a fishing rod. Let's step inside a factory, where the work is steadier, but the danger is quieter and far more sinister. You're a match dipper, very likely a young woman, and you spend long hours dipping match heads into a paste containing white phosphorus. The pay is poor, the shifts are endless, and the fines for the smallest infractions are constant. But the real horror is invisible and slow. The phosphorus fumes attack your jaw, causing a gruesome condition the workers grimly call phossy jaw, which rots the bone from the inside and glows faintly in the dark. You light the lamps and hearths of an entire nation, one tiny match at a time, and that nation has very little idea what it is costing the people who make them. The match seems like such a small, harmless thing, a sliver of wood with a coloured tip, sold by the boxful for next to nothing, struck 1,000,000 times a day without a second thought. But behind that everyday miracle is a factory floor full of women and girls working at brutal speed for brutal wages, and at the heart of the process is white phosphorus, the substance that makes the match strike so easily. It is also a slow poison, and the people who handle it day after day pay for the nation's convenient flame with their own faces. Your working day is long, monotonous, and tightly controlled. You dip, you arrange, you box, hour after hour, your hands moving in the same motions until they ache and then go numb. The factory rules are harsh, and the system of fines is a constant petty cruelty. You can be docked, pay for talking, for being a moment late, for a dropped match, for any small thing the overseers care to notice, so that your meagre wage is nibbled away by penalties before you ever take it home. You're cheap, you're replaceable, and you're reminded of both facts constantly. But the fines and the long hours are the kind parts. The phosphorus fumes, breathed in shift after shift, seep into the body and attack the jawbone, beginning with a toothache that won't go away, and ending in something out of a nightmare. The bone obsesses and dies and rots, the gums swell and stink, and in the dark the diseased jaw is said to glow with an eerie greenish light, a horror you can see in the blackness of a cold bedroom. The only treatment is to remove the jaw entirely, and many who suffer it are disfigured, maimed or killed by the very thing they spend their lives making. The companies know. They could use a safer, costlier phosphorus instead. Many choose not to. This is not a misery suffered in silence forever. The match workers, these poorly paid, badly treated, slowly poisoned young women, have it in them to fight back, and in time they do, walking out in a famous strike that shocks the comfortable public and drags the scandal of the matches into the daylight. It is one of the moments when the people at the very bottom of the heap stand up together and force the world to look at what is being done to them, and it helps light a much larger fire of organised labour. But that reckoning on this particular night is still gathering. So for now you sit at your bench in the long fume-thick room, dipping match after match after match, your wages shaved by fines, your jaw beginning perhaps to ache in a way you try not to think about. Every box that leaves the factory will light a candle, a pipe, a comforting fire in a home that will never know your name or your sacrifice. You are handing the whole country the gift of easy fire and taking in slow and secret payment a piece of yourself with every single match. Romantic in a song and horrific in real life, let's talk about sweeping chimneys. You're a chimney sweep, scrambling up the narrow, soot-choked flues of grand houses with your brushes and scrapers, emerging black from head to toe and coughing up the morning's work. By 1902, the very worst practice, sending small children up the chimneys themselves, is at last against the law, though the law and reality don't always shake hands in the poorer corners of the country. The soot gets into everything. Your eyes, your lungs, the deepest creases of your skin, never fully washing out no matter how hard you scrub. You're sold to the public as a charming little symbol of good luck, which must feel deeply ironic as you hack up black phlegm in a freezing backyard. Chimneys must be swept. That much is simple. A flue choked with soot draws badly, smokes the room, and worst of all can catch fire, sending flames roaring up through the heart of a house. So in every town the sweep is a necessary visitor, arriving with his bundle of brushes and rods, his sacks and his scrapers, to climb up onto the roofs or reach up into the hearths and scour the black build-up from the inside of the chimney. It is dirty, awkward, claustrophobic work, performed in the cramped guts of a building, and somebody has to do it before the whole street goes up. For generations, the somebody was a child. The flues of the old grand houses were narrow and crooked, too tight for a grown man, and so master sweeps used small boys, the smaller the better, sending them up inside the chimney itself to scrape and brush their way to the top. It was a monstrous practice. The children, the so-called climbing boys, were half-starved to keep them small, terrified, beaten or burned upward when they balked, scraped raw by the rough brick, choked by the soot, and not infrequently trapped, suffocated, or killed outright in a flue. That this was tolerated for so long is one of the quieter shames of the age, and it took decades of campaigning to finally outlaw it. By your time, the climbing boys are officially a thing of the past, the law at last forbidding the use of children in the chimneys and insisting the work be done with brushes and rods from below and above. This is real progress, hard won and worth honouring. But the law's reach is uneven, and in the poorer, darker corners of the country, old habits and old cruelties die hard, and the trade as a whole remains filthy, lung-wrecking work even for the grown men who now mostly do it. The soot is the same soot. The danger of fire and fall and foul air is the same, and the soot, that is the thing that never leaves you. It blackens your face and hands until you are recognised in the street by your colour alone. It packs into your lungs and sets up a cough that becomes a wheeze that becomes, in too many cases, something that kills you slowly. There is even a particular cruelty hidden in the soot itself, a creeping illness that long-stalked sweeps, a cancer brought on by years of the black grime worked into the skin, one of the very first times anyone began to understand that a job could quietly give man a fatal disease. So spare a thought for the deep irony of your public image. Out there, the chimney sweep is a lucky charm, a smiling, sooty figure people are glad to see at a wedding, a symbol of good fortune to be shaken by the hand for luck. And here you stand at the end of a long black day, coughing up the inside of someone else's chimney into a freezing yard, your skin permanently grey, your chest already complaining, the very picture of good luck. Lucky for the bride, perhaps. Lucky for the warm, dry family whose fire now draws clean and safe. Lucky for absolutely everyone, you might note, except the sweep. Out in the countryside, far from the city's chaos, there's a job so simple and so lonely it's almost philosophical. You're a bird scarer, usually a small child, and your entire purpose in life is to stand in a freshly sown field and frighten the birds away from the precious seed. You do this with a wooden clapper, a loud voice, the occasional well-aimed stone, and sheer dogged persistence from dawn until dusk, day after day, in every kind of weather. There's nobody to talk to but the crows, and the crows are most certainly not on your side. It's like being a human scarecrow, except scarecrows are at least allowed to stand still. The problem you exist to solve is older than farming itself. A farmer sows his field with seed, the seed that is his whole investment, his next harvest, his family's bread, and the birds, sensible creatures that they are, regard a freshly sown field as an open invitation to a free feast. A flock of hungry rooks and pigeons descending on new-sown ground can strip it bare, eating the future loaf right out of the soil. The scarecrow helps a little, but the birds are clever, and soon learn that a stuffed coat on a stick has never actually harmed anyone. What they fear is something that moves, something that makes noise, something alive. What they fear is you. So you're sent out, often at a very tender age, to spend the long daylight hours patrolling the field, a small lonely figure against the wide sky. Your weapons are humble, a wooden clapper or rattle swung to make a sudden cracking din that sends the flock wheeling up into the air. Your own shouting voice, hoarse by midday from yelling at the sky. A handful of stones to fling and a sling perhaps if you're a good shot. And your simple presence, walking, waving, never quite letting the birds settle long enough to do their damage. You are, in the most literal sense, a scarecrow that breathes. The hardest part is not the work, but the emptiness of it. You are alone, truly alone, in a way few jobs allow, with no companion but the very birds you're at war with, who watch you from the trees with their bright black eyes and bide their time. The hours crawl. The field is the same in every direction. The weather does as it pleases, soaking you in spring rain or baking you in summer sun, and there is no shelter and no relief, and no one to share the long boredom with. For a child it is a strange and solitary education in patience, monotony, and the indifference of the open sky. And the birds, it must be said, are formidable opponents, far cleverer than anyone gives them credit for. They learn your patterns, they post lookouts, they wait until you've walked to the far end of the field and then drop down behind you to feed, scattering only when you turn, mocking you with their timing. It is a daily battle of wits between a small tired child and a flock of wild birds, and the birds win their share of the rounds, which earns you a scolding from the farmer and a renewed, grim determination to outstubborn a crow. It is, on the surface, the simplest job imaginable. Stand in a field and shout. But there is something almost noble in it, this lonely guarding of the seed. This small human will set against the hunger of the sky to protect the harvest that everyone depends on. So you walk your empty field from first light to last, clapper in hand, voice gone ragged, eyes on the tree line, holding the line against the patient, watchful birds. The harvest, if it comes, will feed the whole village. Nobody will thank the child who kept the rooks off it. But the loaf on the table started with you, alone in a cold field, shouting at the wind. Let's go to the seaside, where Edwardian leisure comes with a generous side of mild violence. You're a dipper, and you work the bathing machines. Little wooden huts on wheels that are rolled down into the sea so that respectable bathers can change and enter the water without anyone scandalously glimpsing them in their swimming costume. Your job is to help the bathers, mostly nervous ladies, down the steps and into the cold waves, and by help, the long-standing tradition often means firmly dunking them under whether they happen to be ready or not. You're a strong-armed swimming instructor, a lifeguard, and a gentle bully all in one, standing waist-deep in freezing water all day, plunging strangers beneath the surface for their own enjoyment. To understand your peculiar trade, you must first appreciate the towering importance of modesty at the seaside. Sea bathing is fashionable, even recommended by doctors as healthy and bracing, but the rules of decency are absolute, and the idea of a respectable lady being seen walking across the open beach in her bathing costume is simply unthinkable. The solution is the bathing machine, a wooden changing hut on large wheels, into which the bather climbs fully clothed on the beach, where she changes in private as the whole contraption is rolled down into the sea, so that she emerges, decently hidden, directly into the water. It is privacy by way of a hut on wheels, and it is the height of seaside propriety. Your role begins where the modesty ends and the cold water starts. Many of the bathers, particularly the ladies, cannot swim, and are frankly terrified of the sea, having been told it is good for them, while every instinct screams otherwise. They emerge from the machine clinging to the steps, gasping at the cold, hesitating at the edge. And so the dipper takes charge. Strong, sure-footed, and utterly unsentimental, you take hold of the nervous bather and, in the time-honoured fashion, plunge her bodily under the waves, the theory being that a sudden, complete immersion is more healthful and gets the dreaded business over with quickly. Whether she wished to be plunged is traditionally beside the point. This is harder and more skilled work than it sounds. You stand for hours in the cold sea, your own body chilled to numbness, holding and steadying and dunking a steady stream of frightened strangers, keeping each one safe in water, that could easily knock them off their feet or pull them under for real. You are part attendant, part instructor, part lifeguard, responsible for the safety of people who can't swim, won't relax, and have paid good money for the privilege of being half drowned by you in the name of health. A dipper with a good reputation, gentle but firm, kindly but unyielding, becomes a fixture of the resort, known and requested by the regular visitors. The customers remarkably come back for more. They pay for this. They queue for it. They return summer after summer to be rolled into the sea in a hut and ducked under the waves by a stranger, and they go home declaring themselves wonderfully refreshed and the better for it. It is one of the great gentle absurdities of the age, a thriving industry built on dunking the unwilling for their own good and charging them handsomely for the experience. So there you stand, hour upon hour, waist-deep in the grey cold sea, the bathing machines creaking down the sand behind you, your hands ready to catch and steady and, when the moment comes, to plunge another shrieking holiday-maker beneath the surface. You're frozen, you are soaked, you are quietly hauling the leisured classes through the one bit of their holiday they secretly dread. They call it health, they call it bracing, you call it Tuesday, and you reach out to dunk the next one before they've finished changing their mind. Long before the comforting hum of the refrigerator, keeping food cold was a daily delivery, and you are the one making it. You are the iceman, and you haul great heavy blocks of ice from your cart up the steps and into people's homes, where it goes into a wooden ice box to keep the milk and meat from turning. The ice is cut from frozen lakes in winter, or shipped in vast quantities from colder countries, packed in sawdust and sold off block by block before it can melt away into profit-shaped puddles. You carry it with huge metal tongs, your hands permanently numb, your shoulder permanently aching, forever racing the sun and the warm weather that are quietly trying to put you out of business. The whole strange enterprise rests on a single problem. There is no easy way to make a home cold. The electric refrigerator is barely a rumour, an expensive marvel for the few, so the ordinary household that wants to keep food from spoiling relies on the icebox, an insulated wooden cabinet with a compartment for a block of ice. The ice slowly melts, the cold air sinks over the food, and for a day or two the milk stays sweet and the meat stays safe. But the ice melts, and so the ice must be replaced, every day or two, forever. That endless replacing is your living. The ice itself has had an extraordinary journey before it ever reaches your tongs. Much of it is harvested in winter from frozen lakes and rivers, sawn into great blocks by gangs of men working in brutal cold, then stored in vast insulated ice houses packed with sawdust and straw, where, astonishingly, it keeps through the warm months with surprisingly little loss. Some is shipped in enormous quantities across the seas from far colder lands, a whole international trade built around the simple act of moving the cold from where there's too much of it to where there's none at all. By the time a block reaches your cart, it has been cut, stored, shipped, and hauled across half the world. Also, a housewife can keep her butter firm. Your part of the chain is the last, heaviest mile. You load your cart with blocks, cover them against the sun, and set off on your round, and at each house you size up the order. Chip a block to the right weight, seize it in your great iron tongs, heave it onto a leather-padded shoulder, and carry it dripping up the steps and into the kitchen icebox. The blocks are murderously heavy and slippery and cold enough to burn, and you handle dozens of them a day so that your hands lose all feeling, and your shoulder wears a permanent cold ache, and the front of you is wet through from morning to night. The enemy, always, is warmth, which is a strange thing to fear in a job. Every degree of heat is melting your stock, shrinking your blocks, turning your profit into water in the gutter. A hot spell means you must move faster, sell quicker, Race the sun from house to house before your cargo dwindles away to nothing. You live in a constant, quiet war against the very weather that makes people want your ice in the first place, which is the small, cruel joke at the centre of your trade. The hotter the day, the more they need you, and the less of you there is to go round. And like the lamplighter before you, you carry on a craft with a shadow falling over it, because the refrigerator is coming, that humming box that will make its own cold endlessly in every kitchen, needing no cart, no tongs, no daily delivery, no you. But that future hasn't arrived yet, so you heave the next dripping block onto your aching shoulder and climb the next set of steps, the keeper of the cold in a world that can't yet make its own, racing the sun one melting block at a time. Now the day darkens, and so does the work. You are a funeral mute, and your job is to stand outside the house of the deceased and then accompany the funeral procession, looking utterly and professionally miserable, dressed in black from head to toe, draped in crepe, often clutching a long staff. You say absolutely nothing. That is the entire point, and you radiate solemn grief on behalf of people who hired you precisely so they wouldn't have to manufacture it themselves. You are sadness for rent, despair by the hour, a living prop in the great Victorian theatre of mourning. To understand the demand for your peculiar services, you have to understand how seriously this age takes death. A funeral is not a quiet private affair, but a grand and carefully staged performance, an elaborate display of grief and respectability, in which every detail signals to the watching neighbours just how much the deceased was loved and just how proper the surviving family is. The black horses, the plumes, the polished hearse, the mourning clothes, the sheer expense of it all, these are the measures of a good send-off. And in that careful theatre of sorrow, you are a featured player. Your costume is your craft. Head to foot in black, swathed in crepe, your hat trailing long black streamers called weepers, you're the very image of grief made solid. You take up your post outside the door of the house where death has called, standing silent and motionless with your long draped staff, a sombre signpost announcing to the whole street that this is a house of mourning. Then, when the procession sets out, you walk before or beside the hearse, pacing slow and stately, your face a careful mask of dignified despair, lending the whole affair an air of gravity that the hurried modern world can scarcely imagine. And here is the quiet absurdity you must never let show. You very often didn't know the deceased at all. You are grief for hire, sorrow supplied by the day, a stranger paid to look heartbroken about a person whose name you may have learned only that morning. The family hires you not because you love their dead, but because your professional misery lends the occasion the proper weight, the way one might hire musicians or flowers. You must therefore be genuinely excellent at looking devastated on demand, holding a face of profound sorrow for hours over someone you never met, all while privately wondering what's for supper and whether your feet will hold out. It is, despite the strangeness, steady and respectable work in its way, a recognised part of the undertaker's trade, and a reliable mute with a suitably mournful bearing and a good stock of black clothes, never wants for engagements in a city that buries its dead so seriously and so often. You're part of an entire economy of sorrow, alongside the professional mourners who weep and wail, the makers of mourning jewellery, the sellers of black crepe by the mile. Death, in this age, is a great industry, and you are one of its quietly employed, but the fashion is already beginning to turn. The lavish theatre of mourning, the plumes and the mutes and the streaming weepers, is coming to be seen by some as gloomy excess, as morbid show, and tastes are shifting towards something simpler and less staged. Your silent black figure on the doorstep is starting to look less like solemn respect, and more like a relic of an overdressed grief. So you stand your post in the fading light, draped in black, leaning on your staff, the very portrait of sorrow for a stranger, a professional mourner in a world slowly learning to mourn more quietly. The dead never know you came. The living paid you to be sad, and you simply hold the face and wait for the procession to move. Here is perhaps the strangest and saddest job of them all, lingering on in the remote corners of the country like a half-forgotten ghost. You are a sin-eater. When someone dies, you're quietly called to the house, and a piece of bread and a bowl of ale are passed across the body to you. You eat the bread and drink the ale, and in doing so, by ancient folk belief, you take the dead person's sins into yourself so that their soul might pass on clean. For this, you're paid a few coins and treated as a kind of holy outcast, needed desperately at the worst moments, shunned completely at all the others. The belief behind your work reaches back into a deep and shadowy past, into the old country places where ancient custom and Christian faith have tangled together, into something the official church has never approved of and never quite stamped out. The fear is simple and terrible, that a person who dies with their sins unconfessed and unforgiven cannot rest, that their soul is in peril, that they may even be doomed to wander. And so a remedy was devised, strange and desperate, in which a living person agrees to take those sins upon themselves, swallowing them, quite literally, so that the dead may go to their rest unburdened. The ritual is quiet, solemn, and unsettling. The body is laid out, and over it, or upon it, food and drink are placed. A piece of bread, a bowl of ale, sometimes set right on the breast of the corpse. You're brought in, often after dark, and the food is passed to you across the body. You eat the bread, you drink the ale, and as you do, the assembled mourners believe the sins of the dead pass out of them and into you, leaving the departed soul clean, and the burden now yours to carry. A few small coins are pressed into your hand, and then, your dreadful work done, you are sent quickly on your way. For you bear a terrible double role in the eyes of the community. At the moment of death you are essential, the one person who can do this needful thing, sought out, and brought in when the fear of a soul in peril overcomes every other feeling. But the moment the ritual is finished, you become something to avoid, a person believed to be carrying the accumulated sins of the dead, a walking vessel of other people's wrongdoing. You are needed and unclean in the same breath, called for in the dark and shunned in the daylight, living apart marked by your strange profession, welcome only at the very edge of the worst moments of other people's lives. It is a lonely existence almost beyond imagining, this carrying of the spiritual weight of an entire community in your own body, meal by meal, funeral by funeral. The church condemns the practice as superstition, and worse, the respectable look on you with a mixture of pity and dread, and the work pays only a pittance, taken on, almost always, by the poorest and most desperate, those with no other way to scrape a living and nothing left to lose, not even their own good name. And by your time, by 1902, you are very nearly the last of your kind, perhaps truly the last, a single strange figure clinging on in some quiet rural corner, while the world hurries past into a new century that has no place for you. The custom is dying with the old ways that bore it, fading into folklore and half-remembered tales. So you take the bread, and you drink the ale, and you carry away one more soul's burden into the dark, the last sin-eater in all the land, swallowing the sorrows of strangers so they may rest, and bearing them, alone, so that no one else has to. Now the new century starts to whisper, and the future has a voice, and that voice is yours. You're a telephone switchboard operator, very likely a young woman, and you sit before an enormous board of wires, plugs, and blinking lights, connecting one caller to another entirely by hand all day long. You must be polite to the point of sainthood, fast as lightning, and capable of holding a dizzying tangle of connections in your head while a queue of impatient voices crackles in your ear. The telephone is a genuine marvel, a real glimpse of tomorrow, and you are the human heart of it, the unseen person making every conversation in the city possible. The telephone in these early years cannot connect anyone to anyone on its own. There is no dialing, no automatic exchange. Every single call must be routed by a human being who physically joins one line to another with a cable and a plug. When a caller lifts their receiver, a little light blinks to life on your great switchboard. You answer, you ask whom they wish to reach, and then you take the right cord and push its plug into the right socket, joining the two lines together so they can speak. Multiply that by a constant flood of callers, all wanting their connections at once, and you have your working day, a relentless, dexterous dance of plugs and cords and clipped polite questions. The board before you is a wall of holes, lights and labels, and you must know it the way a musician knows an instrument, your hands moving almost without thought, plugging and unplugging, connecting and releasing, monitoring which calls are still live and which have ended so the lines can be freed for the next. Speed is everything, but so is accuracy, because a wrong plug means a wrong connection, an irritated customer, a complaint. You wear a headset clamped to your ear, you sit straight as a rod under the watchful eye of a supervisor, and you keep up the pace for hours, your fingers flying, your voice never once allowed to lose its smooth, courteous calm. Why a young woman? Almost always. Because the companies decided early and firmly that a woman's voice was more pleasant and reassuring down the line, that women were more patient with the endless courtesies, more reliably polite under pressure, and not least could be paid considerably less than the men first tried in the role. And so the switchboard became a great new employer of young women, row upon row of them seated at their boards, the calm voices that the whole telephone-using public came to know without ever seeing a single face. You're everywhere and nowhere, heard by thousands, seen by none. The discipline is exacting and the rules are many. You must say the correct words in the correct way, never showing impatience however rude the caller, never listening in, never letting a flicker of your own personality crack the smooth professional surface. You're trained to be a kind of perfect, courteous machine, a human component in a marvel of modern engineering, and you're watched closely to make sure you stay that way. It is respectable work, clean and modern and indoor, a real step up from the gutter trades of the old century, but it is exacting, tightly controlled, and quietly demanding in ways the older jobs never were. And yet, for all the strain, you're something genuinely new under the sun, a worker at the very frontier of the future, the living link in a web of voices spreading across the city and the country and, in time, the world. Every secret shared, every deal struck, every piece of urgent news carried down the wire passes, for now, through your quick and careful hands. You are the unseen heart of the most modern thing in the world. The machines that will one day replace you are still being dreamed up. For now, the future speaks, and it speaks only because you plugged it in. And finally, let's meet someone whose job title the future will steal entirely. You are a computer, not a machine. There are no machines for this yet. You're a person, very often a woman, employed to perform long and fiendishly complex calculations by hand, hour after hour, for astronomers, engineers, insurance offices, and the great scientific works of the age. Armed with paper, a pencil, and a mind like a steel trap, you grind through columns of numbers that would make most people weep, checking and rechecking, because a single small error could send a ship off course or a bridge toward collapse. You are precise, you are patient, and you are paid a fraction of what a man doing the very same work would earn. The word computer in your time, does not mean a machine at all. It means exactly what it says: one who computes, a person who does calculations. The modern world, for all its marvels, runs on mathematics that must be worked out by somebody, and there are no electronic brains to do it. The positions of the stars and planets, the strength of a bridge or a ship's hull, the careful odds that let an insurance company set its premiums, the tables of figures that engineers and navigators and scientists depend upon, all of it must be calculated laboriously by human hand and human mind. That mind is yours. Your work is a vast, patient grind of arithmetic. You're given long sequences of calculations, often broken into pieces and shared out among a roomful of computers like yourself, each handling a portion of a problem too enormous for any one person to finish alone. With pencil, paper, printed tables of logarithms, and perhaps a mechanical adding machine if your office is well equipped, you work through the figures step by careful step, hour after hour, day after day. It demands ferocious concentration, total accuracy, and a tolerance for monotony that would break most people, because the numbers never end and the smallest slip can ruin everything. For accuracy is the whole point, and the stakes are real. A computer's figures are not an abstract exercise. They guide ships across oceans, hold up bridges, fly to the edge of what the age can build. An error buried in a column of numbers can propagate outward into disaster, and so your work is checked and rechecked, often by another computer working the same problem independently. The two results compared until they agree. You are a guardian of precision in a world that increasingly runs on it, and the quiet reliability of your arithmetic underpins achievements that will carry famous men's names, never yours. And like the switchboard, this is a trade that quietly opened its doors to women, partly because the work was thought to suit a patient and meticulous temperament, and partly, as ever, because women could be paid so much less for it. Rooms full of women, pencils in hand, working through the mathematics of the modern age for a fraction of a man's wage, their names absent from the papers and the prizes their labour made possible. You are skilled, essential, and almost entirely invisible, the hidden engine behind the century's grand calculations. But here is the strange and quietly poignant truth that hangs over your bench. One day, perhaps not so very far off, a machine will be built to do precisely what you do, faster than any human hand, without tiring, without complaint, without error, and it will be given your name. The word computer will slip from you and settle onto a humming box of wires and switches, and the world will forget that it ever meant a living person bent over paper in a quiet room. You are the last of the true computers, the human kind, and you are, without knowing it, doing the very job you're about to hand to the future. The word means you, for now. Let's meet the fastest thing on two wheels, weaving through the traffic with a leather pouch and an air of tremendous importance. You are a telegraph boy, and your job is to deliver telegrams, the urgent messages of the age, tapped out in code and printed on flimsy paper, carried at speed from the post office to whoever is waiting, dreading or hoping for news. In an era when an ordinary home has no telephone, you are the closest thing there is to instant communication, a small uniformed sprinter carrying the most important words people will receive all year. You are, in effect, the human internet, except the internet has knobbly knees and a bicycle that squeaks. The telegram is the marvel that made you necessary. A message can now race across the country in minutes, flashing along the wires from one office to another faster than any horse or train could ever manage, which to people raised on letters that took days feels very nearly like magic. But the wire only reaches as far as the telegraph office. From there, the printed message must still travel the final distance to the actual person it's meant for, through real streets, up real stairs to a real front door. That final, vital, breathless leg of the journey is yours, and you run it dozens of times a day. You're got up in a smart uniform with a pillbox cap and shining buttons, because the service that employs you is proud and wants you to look it, and because a uniform opens doors that a scruffy boy never could. You wait at the office for the next message to come clattering off the machine, then you are off, on foot, or, if you're lucky and quick, on a bicycle, weaving through the crowds and the carts and the horse traffic at a pace that leaves grown men staring. Speed is the entire point of view. A telegram that arrives slowly might as well have been a letter, and a slow telegraph boy is soon an unemployed one. The contents of your pouch are a strange and heavy privilege, because a telegram is never ordinary. People do not spend good money tapping out small talk down the wire. They send a telegram when something matters enormously. A birth, a death, a wedding, a business deal won or lost, a son safe, or a son not. You are forever knocking on doors and watching faces change in an instant, handing over a slip of paper that brings joy or shatters a whole life, and then standing there, cap in hand, while the recipient reads. You learn very young to read the news in their eyes, and to know whether this is a doorstep to linger on hopefully for a tip, or one to slip quietly away from. The tip is the heart of your wages, the little extra pressed into your palm by a grateful or distracted recipient, and a good boy on a good round learns exactly how to earn it. Prompt, polite, neat, and always ready with a respectful word. You come to know your district intimately, the quick lanes and the locked gates and the houses where the maid will keep you waiting, and the houses where the master tips well for speed. It is honest, modern, respectable work. A real step for a poor boy with quick legs and a willing manner, and a foot on the ladder of the great post office besides. But the wire that made you is already growing longer, reaching closer, and the telephone is beginning to creep into homes and offices, letting people speak to one another directly with no boy in between. The day is coming when the urgent news will simply ring on a table and need no sprinter at all. For now, though, the message still needs legs, and the legs are yours. So you tuck the neck slip into your pouch, swing onto your squeaking bicycle, and tear off into the traffic, the fastest, proudest, most important boy in the whole hurrying city, carrying tomorrow's news at the speed of your own 2 feet. Now let's meet a man of science, or at least a man who is very confident that he is one. You are a phrenologist, and your remarkable profession is to read a person's entire character, intelligence, and destiny by carefully feeling the bumps on their head. With sensitive fingertips, a confident manner, and a printed chart of the skull divided into neat little regions, you run your hands over a client's scalp and pronounce, with absolute authority, on their honesty, their temper, their cleverness, and their hidden talents. It is, depending on how you look at it, the cutting edge of human understanding, or an elaborate way of charging money to pat someone's head. You naturally prefer the first description. The theory behind your craft is gloriously, beautifully tidy, which is precisely why people love it. The brain, you explain to your clients in your most learned voice, is made up of many separate organs, each responsible for a particular trait, one for kindness, one for cunning, one for love of children, one for a talent for music, and so on across the whole landscape of the human soul. The larger an organ, the stronger that trait, and a large organ pushes the skull out above it into a telltale bump. Therefore you conclude with a flourish. The shape of the head is a perfect map of the person within, and you, with your trained fingers, are the only one who can read it. Your consulting room is a temple to this idea. On the shelves sit china heads marked all over with the regions of character and busts of famous men whose skulls supposedly prove the theory. On the wall hangs your chart. You greet your client, seat them, and begin the examination, your fingers moving slowly and gravely over their scalp, pausing here to murmur, pressing there to nod thoughtfully, while they sit in growing suspense waiting to learn the truth about themselves. Then you deliver the reading, a confident stream of pronouncements about their fine intellect, their generous heart, their unfortunate tendency to stubbornness, all received with the rapt attention people always give to anyone telling them about themselves. The genius of your trade, which you would never admit is a trick, is that people will pay handsomely to be explained to themselves, especially flatteringly. Your readings cover marriage, advising whether two people's heads are suited to one another. They cover careers, telling an anxious young man which trade his bumps best fit him for. Employers have even been known to consult you about whether a candidate's skull suggests an honest worker, which means your fingertips occasionally decide who gets hired, a sobering thought you choose not to dwell on. You are part scientist, part fortune teller, part flattering friend, and entirely a performer. It must be said that the serious men of science have, by your time, largely turned their backs on phrenology, dismissing it as nonsense, a discredited fad with no real foundation. The brain, they now insist, simply does not work the way your tidy chart suggests, and the bumps on a skull reveal nothing at all about the soul beneath. But the public, blessedly for your livelihood, has not entirely got the message, and there remains a healthy appetite for a confident man who will feel your head and tell you who you are, whether at a respectable parlour or a bustling fairground booth. So you carry on, running your knowing fingers over scalp after scalp, dispensing destiny by the handful, charging good coin for the ancient human pleasure of being told all about oneself. It is, in truth, not so very different from the horoscopes and personality tests that the future will love just as dearly. The same comforting illusion dressed in the science of the day. You feel the bumps, you nod sagely, you pronounce. The client leaves delighted, convinced they have been understood at last, and you pocket the fee, a man who has discovered the one truly bottomless market in all the world, people's endless fascination with themselves. Up at the top of the coal mine, where the great cages come rattling up from the black depths below, there is a job that scandalized the whole of polite society, and it belongs to you. You're a pit-brow lass, one of the women who work at the surface of the colliery, sorting and screening the coal as it pours up from underground, in all weathers, for long hard hours, for low hard pay. You do not go down the mine, the law forbids that. But you labour at the pit brow above it, doing heavy, dirty, dangerous work. And the thing that truly outrages the respectable world is not the danger or the hardship. It is of all things your trousers. Let's start with the work itself, because it is no gentle occupation. The coal comes up from the deep in great filthy loads, and before it can be sold it must be cleaned, sorted from the stone and the rubbish, broken to size, screened and picked over by hand. That is your domain, the pit brow, the bank, the screens, where you stand for hour upon hour in the cold and the wet and the eternal black dust, hauling, picking, breaking, and sorting. Your hands hardened, your back aching, your face and arms grimed with coal that never fully washes off. It is the kind of relentless physical labour that would fell many a soft city gentleman within the hour, and you do it day in, day out, without complaint. Your clothing, the great scandal, is purely practical. You cannot do this filthy, heavy, hazardous work in the long-flowing skirts that decency demands of a proper woman, because long skirts catch in the machinery and drag in the muck and are simply impossible to work in. So you wear stout trousers or rolled-up skirts over breeches, with aprons and headscarves and clogs. sensible clothing for sensible work. And this somehow becomes a national controversy, because the sight of a working woman in trousers is more than the comfortable classes can bear, an affront to everything they believe a woman ought to be. The campaign against you is loud, earnest, and entirely missing the point. Reformers and gentlemen and newspaper writers, scandalised by your dress and convinced the work is unwomanly and degrading, push to have you banned from the pit brow altogether, supposedly for your own good. They're quite sure that no respectable woman would choose such labour, that you must be rescued from it whether you like it or not. What they conveniently overlook is that you do this work because you need the wages, that it is honest and you are proud of it, and that being thrown out of it for the crime of wearing practical clothes would not save you, only starve you. And so, remarkably, you fight back. Pit-brow women travel to be seen and heard, to argue plainly that the work is theirs by choice and right, that they are strong, capable, and entirely respectable, and that they would very much like to keep the jobs that feed their families, thank you very much. It is a strange and stirring sight. Working women in clogs and headscarves, standing up to a chorus of their supposed betters, and defending, with quiet dignity, their right to honest hard labour. More often than not, against the odds, they win the right to carry on, so you take your place at the screens once more in your scandalous trousers under the rattling cages and the grey northern sky, sorting the coal that warms a nation entirely indifferent to who cleaned it. You're dirty, you're aching, and you are the subject of furious debate in places you will never see, by people who would not last an hour at your work. Let them write their letters and wring their hands over your wardrobe. You have coal to sort and a family to feed, and you'll do it dressed for the job, whatever the gentlemen of the newspapers may think. So, there you have it. A single working day in 1900's Britain, lived through the aching backs and frozen fingers of the people who actually held these jobs. You were woken before dawn by a man with a stick. You swept manure for strangers, waded into the river for a lump of coal, climbed down into the sewers by candlelight, and carried the city's unmentionable leavings away in the dark. You dipped matches that glowed in your jaw, sorted coal in scandalous trousers, fed the cats, lit the lamps, and stood silent and sad at the funerals of people you never met. You worked until your body gave out, for wages that barely kept you alive, doing the things that nobody else would do. And yet, they did them. Every grim, strange, back-breaking one of them. Not because the work was kind, but because it had to be done, and because they were stubborn enough and hopeful enough to do it anyway. The whole comfortable modern world you live in was quietly built on their shoulders. One bucket, one block of ice, one bellowed cherry, one frozen morning at a time. So tonight, as you drift off in your warm bed, with your alarm clock that asks for no wages and your refrigerator humming softly in the kitchen, maybe spare a quiet thought for them. The knocker-uppers and the mudlarks, the lamplighters and the leech collectors, the nameless people whose strange little jobs simply vanished when the world moved on, taking them with it. Because history is gross and it is hard and it is often absurd. But it is also proof that people will endure almost anything and find something to laugh about while they do it. Sleep well. You've earned it. They certainly did.